Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and my guest today is Gabby Southern Daiss, who graduated OCS and was commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps in 2019. Gabby was taking part in the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit as an adjutant for Combat Logistics Battalion 24 when she was diverted to Hamid Karzai International Airport to assist with the withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021. Gabby has now gotten out of the Marine Corps, and she serves on the board of directors for Operation Allies Refuge Foundation. And Gabby, I was telling you before we started recording, at least half a dozen people have urged me to reach out to you in the process of doing this podcast. So it's really an honor to have you here and to finally hear your story. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love to go way back. I usually go back to Afghanistan, but I think for this, I really want to go back to why you decided to join the Marine Corps and when, obviously 2019, but when you did that and what the choice to do that was motivated by.
Yeah, so I was a junior in college and I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. I grew up very fortunate. My parents are business owners. They're the best people in the world. I wanted to do something to give back to the country that gave so much to me and my family. And at the same time, I wanted to do something where I felt like I was helping others, just because I feel like I've been so fortunate my whole life. And, I'm always someone who wants to challenge myself. I grew up figure skating, which I think is a complete contrast to going and becoming a Marine Corps officer. At the time where I was actually, getting ready to go into the Marine Corps, I was a ice girl for the Philadelphia Flyers. And all the girls there were just super supportive, and because that was just such a new thing that there's not really a lot of ice skaters that go and join the Marine Corps. I guess I just wanted to give back, and I think I was able to do that. I went from not really believing in myself to just being able to accomplish so much. There was people who told me you'll never be able to do it. Like a female in the Marine Corps, that is just impossible for you. And I actually went and saw an Air Force recruiter first, but they weren't there and they never called me back. So the next step was to become a Marine. One of my best friends was in the Marine Corps and I always admired him. So it's one of the best decisions I've ever made.
That's really amazing. And I've known many Marine officers and dated one for a while, and there's definitely a feeling about women in the Marine Corps. There's a bias. And how did that impact you during your service, or did it impact you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was very lucky, I think, when I was in the Marine Corps. I didn't really experience too much, sexual discrimination or sexual harassment, whereas some females do experience quite a bit of that. So I consider myself very lucky, but, it is kind of a boys' club, and it is challenging for females, especially female Marine officers. Going through OCS, I was in a female platoon. All OCS platoons are all female. So once I graduated officer candidate school, I went to the basic school, which is just 6 months of, all right, now you're an officer, and we're going to get you ready to be a leader of Marines. So with that, there's a bunch of mental, physical, leadership challenges, and so I went from being in an all-female platoon at OCS to now being, one of, I think it was 4 or 5 females in a 40-person platoon at the basic school. And it was really hard because now, where I was maybe the middle of the pack physical fitness-wise in OCS, now I'm the very bottom because say what you want, females and males, they don't have the same chemical makeup. I can't do 25 pull-ups. I want to, and I can get kind of close, but it's just like, I really was struggling when I got to TBS, and it was sort of, all right, no matter what you do, it might not be good enough. Like, your best might not be good enough because these people sort of do have an advantage over you. And it was really hard. And there's also things that because of my upbringing, I wasn't kind of around. Like, for example, doing land navigation. I wasn't familiar with maps and all that sort of stuff growing up. So I found myself doing remedial land nav every single weekend at TBS, out on every Saturday. And I think people kind of thought like, oh, like, she's a piece of shit. But I was just struggling, and it was really hard. It's also harder to make friends because, a lot of the men have wives. A lot of their wives don't like you being friends with a female Marine. So there's just slim pickings when it comes to finding people who you're going to be friends with and spend your days with. It was really hard. Yeah.
No, I believe it, and I can understand the land nav struggle. When I was in Intel, they made us do this military familiarization course so that we would, understand what our military client goes through every day, working for the Army as a civilian. And oh my gosh, land nav was tough. We just did like a 2-day, how to read military maps, and they threw us out in the wilderness of Maryland and tried to make us we found nothing. Like, there were 6 things we were supposed to find, we found nothing. So, it's not easy. But doing remedial land nav, like, you clearly wanted to do it, and it takes that. Like, are you gonna rise to meet the challenge and put in what it takes? And you clearly put in what was necessary to get there, and I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I think that's what, like, being a Marine is all about. Like, you might not be the best at something, but it's whether or not you can work at it to become better, or maybe even to become the best.
Yeah, and those are the best stories too, right? This is what you thought of me? Let me show you now. I will show you. So I want to fast forward now, right? 2 years after, getting your commission, you are in the MEU, and was there any indication when you guys took off that, the withdrawal was going to go off and you might be there?
No, so we left for the MEU in February of 2021. So obviously all the COVID stuff was still going on. We started out the MEU. We went to England, Spain, all these, Portugal, a bunch of cool places. And everyone joked I was on the little deck, the USS Carter Hall, and everyone joked with us saying that we were the booze cruise because we could get into every single port. So it really was, you would grind out for a couple of days, and then you would almost go on like 3 to 5 day bender whenever you'd be ported. So, the MEU started out, it was just, we were training. We trained with the Portuguese. We trained in England, and then we would work when we were on ship, obviously do our day-to-day jobs. And then it wasn't until about May time frame we sort of started to realize something was going on, because we were supposed to do a Mediterranean cruise, and then all of a sudden May comes around and they tell us, oh, we're going to be crossing this into Fifth Fleet, which is of course the Middle East. So in May we went to Greece, and then after Greece we went through the Suez Canal in Egypt and went straight to Jordan. And in Jordan is where we went ashore, and it started to kind of come to light that, hey, there's something going on in Afghanistan, and we're going to have to go in there, and that it's a possibility. And at first it was just briefed to us that, okay, this is just a possibility, it's not 100%. And then so we were in Jordan for about a month. That's when me and some female staff NCOs sort of determined, hey, if we're going to go and do this non-combatant evacuation operation in the culture that is Afghanistan, that we're going to need females to search women and children. So that's when we started sort of crafting that plan.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because that's the thing is you're usually trained up for whatever you're about to go into. And so I remember hearing that there were FETs on the ground at HKIA. Was that you guys being trained, like training yourself to be FETs, basically, like on the boat?
Exactly. So
tell me more. Tell me more. Yeah. That's amazing.
So when you're talking about, we try to use the word like female search team because when you're talking about FET or female engagement team, a certain sort of training goes with that. And we want like everyone to know that we did not have that training. And because there's courses associated with FET teams and a lot of infantry type training, which, you know, every Marine, yes, is a rifleman, but there's certain schoolhouses that you have to go to, you know, be trained in order to execute something a certain way. And so that's why we sort of called ourselves like female search teams. And so when we were in Jordan, that's when we didn't really start training then because we were still looking to get approval to do the female search teams. And we got back on ship at the end of June and we started, you know, we were told that yes, we're going to go through with the female search teams, that yes, it is a necessity. And we started training with 1-8, who was also on our ship. They sort of started teaching us what the proper search techniques were and, you know, just some of the basics. And then we went ashore to Bahrain for a couple of days. We did some training in a warehouse there, which was nothing like where we were in Afghanistan, obviously. And then, you know, got back on ship and then we were told, all right, we're getting off for the rest of deployment, which also we were kind of towards the end of our deployment as it had started in February of 2021. And so in mid-July, we get off the ships and go ashore to Kuwait. And Kuwait's when we really started hitting it hard with the training because it was, you know, becoming more and more of a possibility every day that, yes, we would be going and doing this thing. So we crafted the teams. We had to figure out who was staying back because we didn't bring the entire MEU with us. So there were a lot of females that were not utilized, which is unfortunate because of the manpower struggles we faced out there. And so, yep, we were training really hard. We got with we were at Al Jaber Air Base in Kuwait, and their MPs there were amazing. They gave us a class. We got with some of the MPs that were with the command element of the MEU, and they helped us out, gave us some classes. We tried to make the training as realistic as we could, but we didn't really know what we were going to be facing when we got there. We were told that it would be a compliant crowd that we were facing in Afghanistan, which we now know was not the case, because we did try to create scenarios that you know, showed chaos, but we were told no, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be so that's what we trained for. We trained for a compliant crowd, which is unfortunate that it wasn't determined beforehand that the crowd would be absolutely chaotic, which honestly, it blows my mind that nobody came up with that, because when everyone's leaving their country, you can imagine it would probably be very chaotic. And that's what everyone was saying too, but yep. And then, you know, it's getting into August at this point, and it's getting closer and closer to the deadline, which we know is August 31st, and they're still not sending us until around, I would say the 10th is when we got told that we were going, and the first group of people went over, and then I went over there. I got there on the 16th.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So I have more questions from what you just told me. First off, who was telling you guys that it was going to be a compliant crowd? Was that like state telling you guys?
Our leadership.
Wow. But you were getting ready in June. That's my other. I mean, you saw this coming in June, but our leadership didn't see it or didn't really start to admit it until, gosh, I wouldn't even know what to say about when we finally admitted this is going to be insane. And so imagine if you guys hadn't had the mental acuity to say, we need to prepare for this,
Right.
you know?
We were lucky, I think, because, you know, of the intel team we had. I think at least some people started to put two and two together of what was going to be going down, possibly. So, yeah.
And I will say, too, like, MCIA and NGIC and stuff like that had less, well, I don't want to say things that might not be true, but the bigger intelligence groups always seem to have to kowtow to higher leadership, whereas the smaller ones can kind of be more agile and actually talk about what's happening on the ground. And so I would imagine that if you're getting information from, like, MCIA, you're probably getting some good intel. Versus if you're getting it from the bigger groups that are trying to make leaders happy. But I didn't say that, except I just said that. So the 16th, you show up in Kabul. The country fell to the Taliban the day before you got there. Yeah. What did it look like, and what was your impression of what was going on around you?
Yep, so before we actually got there, we were sitting in Kuwait seeing all the reports come through on the news of what was happening with the civilians, you know, overrunning the airfield. And it was just like the feeling that you feel. It's like you're terrified, but your friends are there because there was some people that went advan. So you just want to get there. So it's like the craziest feeling in the world. And then, you know, you're texting your friends that are there, hey, are you okay? What's going on? And of course, obviously, they can't get back to you because they're dealing with civilians running all around the airstrip. And so that was pretty crazy. And then because of that, we were stuck. We had I guess you could call it like a layover in Qatar. And we were stuck there for about 8 hours, just sitting on the flight line in Qatar for 8 hours, and the airplanes that were coming from Afghanistan were coming to Qatar and landing, and they were having body parts pulled from their engines and from their wheel wells and all sorts of stuff, because obviously we all know what happened. And so when we got on that plane to go to Afghanistan, it was late in the night, and nobody had any idea what to expect when we got there. You know, the captain or the pilot came over the intercom, and they said, okay, you know, we're going to be landing in 5 minutes. And so everyone put on their flak and Kevlar, loaded up their weapons, because we didn't know what we were going to be facing. The 1-8 Marines that were on our flight ended up posting security before the, you know, I don't know what this thing is called, before the airplane opened, because we didn't know what to expect. And it turns out it was a calm scene, like total night and day from what we were seeing from the night before. We landed, and it was morning, and my XO was standing out there to greet us, which was really great because, you know, everyone loved him. So it was nice to see a friendly face when you step off into a foreign country. And the first thing I noticed really was how beautiful it was there. Like, I love nice scenery, and it just immediately made me sad because, you know, you have this beautiful country that you would love to come back and visit to, you know, explore the mountains and the culture, but you can't because it's just been so war-torn for so long. It was really just, you know, overwhelming. That moment in itself is something I'll never forget. And you also feel just so much fear because you don't know what these next couple of weeks are going to bring. You had to have some tough conversations before even, going there, because you don't know if you're going to leave. I mean, it was really, it was really tough. And then we got there, landed, and immediately went to our first shift at Northgate to relieve some of the girls that were working there already.
Right. And so from my understanding, female Marines over at the gates, like you didn't get that rest time that males got because there were so few. What was that? So there was no break for you, no, like, here's where you put your things. It was just go. How did that feel?
Yeah, I don't think that anyone there got any rest at all the entire time we were there. So the original plan that we had that we were going to try to do was 8 hours on, 8 hours off. And we thought that would give us, we knew that we weren't going to really be sleeping. So that's what we tried to execute. But of course we had people getting pulled every which way. We were originally just supposed to be manning East Gate and North Gate, but we were getting pulled to do different operations elsewhere that they needed females for, so that they could search women and children that were coming through different gates. And so the manpower was just lacking. It was not good. And then you have Marines that are at the evacuation control center at the terminal, and they need help over there too, because it's just absolute chaos there. So a lot of the girls would actually get off their shift and go see where else they could help out. Me, I was still the adjutant for my unit, so I would have to go and do my actual job in my free time. So it was really hard. Not a lot of sleep at all for anyone at HKIA.
Yeah, I guess when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about Mike Markland's infamous video from afterwards, where he does have those scenes of the guys kind of like, and you have to, right? You have to decompress, but it sounds like you just didn't even have that like small decompression time where you're supposed to be sleeping, but you're probably so amped that like, there's little sleep going on. I can't even imagine that, and that's the situation for you guys on the ground and all the people back home trying to get a hold of you to get you guys to pull Afghans out. I mean, it just the amount of pain and hardship that was inflicted during that period on humans, and like what was asked of you is just incredible and superhuman.
Right. Yeah, it was really hard to see all of that, just like absolute suffering. And honestly, like I said at the beginning, I grew up very, very lucky. So I had never seen anything like that, nothing close to that. So it was just like complete, I was in shock the entire time, just of all the stuff that we were seeing out there. And and I was a little bit older. I was 24, but there's Marines that are going there that are 19 years old. So for them to have to see that too, it really leaves an impression on them. And I think as females too that were working out there, people think that other female Afghans think that they can come up to you and sort of appeal to you with what they're going through. And it is really, really hard because you're being told one thing by your leadership, but yet, you still have your morals and you want to try to help these women. And then the kids it's a whole nother story. That is just heartbreaking. The amount of kids that were without their parents, were just left unsupervised. There were countless times in which an older adult male would try to grab a kid and claim that kid as his own because he thought that that would get him to the front of the line. Yeah, it was just awful. Everything was awful.
And so that's what you're seeing at, you said Northgate, right? Or where you first took the shift when you got there was
Yep.
Northgate.
So Northgate, from the get-go, things weren't really too bad immediately. It wasn't until a couple days started to go by when I think the panic really started to set in. But I mean, there were people that were freaking out initially at Northgate, but it wasn't such a bad scenario as, days and, weeks to come.
Okay, so I want to talk about it in like the order that you were in those places to kind of understand how that developed and what it looked like. And so from Northgate, were you there primarily when you weren't at, let's say, like the evacuation control center or the JOC? Like, how did that rotation work? And walk me through those days and the progression.
Yep. So what we decided to do with the shifts was to alternate gates. So, and to be honest with you, I forget how, if we did it, Northgate, Eastgate, Northgate, Eastgate. But I remember I started out at Northgate. I think it wasn't until a couple days later that they opened up Eastgate, if I'm not mistaken. But immediately at Northgate was set up weird too. So there's a culture thing, obviously, that you have to try to be respectful of. So, trying to search women and children, and a lot of the times women would hide things in their undergarments, like money and jewels and stuff like that. So, and their clothing is not easy to take off, and obviously they're not supposed to do it around other males. So there was an alleyway at Northgate that we were using to try to search women, and so you're searching a woman, and you have to, it is very intrusive, the search, and if you feel something, you have to tell them to take it out. So people were taking out like so much money, all these jewels, and then people, I think when panic started to set in, they were just starting to try to do what they could to get pushed to the front, which is completely understandable. So we had people just like begging, pleading, like trying to appeal to anything, like saying stuff like, if it was your family, what would you do? And then asking you, can you go get my family? And we weren't allowed to leave HKIA, and I didn't want to go out there to be honest with you. The Taliban was out there, God knows who else was out there. And as the days were going on and the crowd is getting worse, people are coming in with more and more injuries that are increasing in severity. Gunshot wounds, heat casualties. There were women going into labor. It was just a terrible scenario.
That is really terrible. And so that's what the days consisted of for you there, is just trying to give these women some privacy, but also make sure that there's nothing coming in that's going to injure or harm anyone on the premises. And then, so tell me about the evacuation control center and the JOC. What was the job like in those environments?
So when I was at the evacuation control center, I mainly would go there to try to do my job in the off hours until I eventually did get taken off the female search team to solely do my job a couple days before the bombing. But so when I was at the evacuation control center, very, very crowded, nowhere to really walk around. Just people laying and sleeping everywhere, which was the case at the gates as well, especially when they started to let more and more people in, and then there weren't flights going out. There was just people everywhere. The terminal itself had issues with the bathrooms because so many people were using the bathrooms. So when you were there, you just smelled feces. Everyone smelled like BO and feces. And so I will never forget the smell of HKIA as a whole. And then you have a bunch of Marines working at the terminal trying to, keep everyone together, keep everyone not wandering off. That's the biggest thing. So that was a job in itself. And then you have, especially at the evacuation control center and the JOC, you have a lot of higher ranking people that it doesn't seem like they can come to a decision together. And don't get me wrong, there was a bunch of people that, were great, amazing to work with. But it's like you go into so switching over to the JOC, whenever you go into the JOC, it was like a different world, because that's where all the high-ranking people were working. I would go into the JOC just to use the bathroom because the bathrooms there were nice and they were working. So yeah, I went there just to go to the bathroom. I went there to check with my leadership to make sure they didn't need anything with me. But then, you go in there and there's all these people that you try to talk to them to ask if there's anything you can help with. And they sort of give you the cold shoulder because they're busy, but it's like, I'm busy too, actually. I'm trying to help you. But yeah, between the gates and the JOC, it was complete night and day. They had great conditions over there.
That's so crazy. And yet not crazy, because isn't that how things tend to work in that setup? I'm glad that you had those bathrooms. I've seen, not to go back again to Mike Markland's video, but he showed the restroom facilities, and it was just like, how could anybody even, you couldn't use them at that point. No. They're full to capacity.
People stopped showering because at one point the water stopped working there completely on HKIA. So then you couldn't flush the toilets, and then by the time you could flush the toilets, you couldn't because there was so much built up. And then and then females and men showering together because that was the only option. There was only where I was living, which I lived in a warehouse on the ground. I slept on the ground for almost 3 weeks straight. It was one bathroom essentially, and we did have our own bathroom for a little bit, but once everything got more chaotic, we couldn't even control who was going in there. So, and then obviously the female bathroom was a little bit better maintained than the male bathroom, so all the men wanted to go there anyways. So, yep, the porta-johns were overflowing. The whole entire thing was so unsanitary. It's amazing that we all made it out of there without terrible illnesses.
It really sounds that way. I'm amazed. Now, in the course of all that, as things are getting more chaotic, did the JOC ever get more chaotic, or was it always just a respite from the chaos?
The only time I saw the JOC super chaotic was on August 26th.
Yeah, and I can imagine that. And I'd like to come back to that after, because if you start at the 16th, right? You've got the first couple days where things are kind of okay, this is manageable. And obviously we've talked about the facilities getting overrun and the living conditions, which is just horrendous and heinous. But what about the gates before then? How did North Gate and East Gate look as you get closer to the end of when people know we are getting out of there, we're pulling chocks?
Yep. So, like I said, at first it was manageable. As time went on, like I said, more and more injuries. We did have corpsmen on our team, so like female corpsmen on our team. So the female corpsmen were getting pulled every direction to go deal with injuries, to go deal with people going into labor. And we did have, the way that we were set up, we didn't account for the fact that we needed to have hasty search teams at the very front. So that was essentially just, quick pat down, making sure there's not like a gun or anything else that you can feel, and then a quick look in the bag. So we lost 2 females to that at every shift because we needed to have those females up there. And then at the little bit further inside the gates, then we would have the rest of our team. But then you have the female corpsmen that are dealing with all the injuries. So North Gate was more chaotic for sure at the beginning than Eastgate was. So my first shift at Eastgate, I remember thinking, wow, this is like a breath of fresh air. I don't know if it had anything to do with what was located outside those gates, if maybe also because North Gate was on a main road. I'm assuming that accessibility to that gate might have been a little bit easier to get to than maybe Eastgate, or Eastgate didn't have, maybe people didn't know it was open at first, but it did. Eastgate ended up getting, at one point, it seemed worse than Northgate, because there was a lot more room for people to just stand around there. So you had people stealing taking cardboard boxes and just setting up there because, they weren't being, I guess, taken to the terminal right away, or maybe they were waiting for a family. We were handing out baby formula. We were handing out our food. We were handing out our MREs, and, the food and water supply was getting worse there. And, at first we were not checking people and their paperwork. So the way that we sort of thought about it is, like, if they're here, then we're going to let them in, and, maybe they're going to be turned away later on. But that's not for us to decide. And then as the days are going on and things are getting more crowded at HKIA, that's when it started to come down the pipeline. Okay, you need to check for this paperwork. You need to check for this paperwork. So people are, like, making their way through the gate at some point, but yet it's determined they don't have paperwork. And that is just a terrible situation because they think that they made it, and then they're being literally dragged out, kicking and screaming and, saying what they think is going to happen to them once they're on the other side back into Afghanistan. And it's just terrible. Like, you almost feel like you're in charge of who lives and who dies almost, which it's not really that, it's obviously someone else who's in charge of that, but that's how it feels. And that's what those people think when you're kicking them out, or when they're trying to show you their paperwork and you have to, hold them back and say, hey, she needs to go or he needs to go. This isn't the right thing. And then there was obviously issues with people having food and water waiting outside of the gates. There was a certain time at East Gate, which I can't really say what happened out there because I don't know. I can assume that people were being forced to fight over water because people were coming in incredibly dehydrated and beaten and bloody. That's what we sort of understood the situation to be outside of the gates. So you're having to deal with all of that, all of the medical situations.
Holy cow. because every time I've talked to somebody who is at HKIA, the moral injury of it all comes up, and that's exactly what you're describing, right? Is being forced to basically play God when it goes against everything you stand for, to have to do that and to have to send someone back to the Taliban who are pulling security for us, which still, that's the thing. God, I can't get over that, and I'll never get over that. You know, and to have to watch them and watch the suffering that is going on outside, and knowing that there's nothing, I mean, what was that like for you? I mean, could you tell at that point that it was going to be something that was going to be difficult for a long time, do you think?
I remember sending my mom a text, and I said to her, I don't think I'm ever going to be happy again. Because I felt like I was in shock, and I wasn't processing it at the time, but I also, the memories were fresh in my mind, and I am very good, good or bad, at compartmentalizing. So there's a lot of stuff like when you're asking me questions, it genuinely is kind of hard for me to remember a lot of this stuff, because this is one of the first times I've really talked about it, and I've just been pushing it to the back of my mind for the last 3 years. But when I was there, I genuinely did not know how I was going to be able to get over all of the suffering and everything that happened there.
I know you say you haven't talked about it before, but I want to push back on that, because your recall is incredible, and that shows either that it has played through your head many, many times, or that it was just that impactful then that it seared itself into your brain, or some combination of those two things, where like, I don't know, do you think any of those is correct, or am I totally taking a leap into non-truths?
No, so I think you're right. What I did too, when I first got there, I started to make a journal of so I could remember things. I actually started it a couple days before we left. And then after my first shift at North Gate, I deleted everything off my phone that I had previously documented, because I told myself I never want to remember this. And I ended up getting back from Afghanistan, and there was one night where I had, one too many drinks, and I was really kicking myself for not continuing to document everything. So at that moment, I put everything in the notes on my phone from what I could remember. I've went over it twice, I think, but I don't like to that much.
I don't know if you've found this, and I obviously anything that I've done this about has not been anywhere near what you went through, right? But once I get it down on paper, at least then I don't have to think about it as much anymore, because it's on paper and I know, you know what I mean? I know that it happened, and maybe I'll add things if they come to me. Right. But I mean, do you think it is helpful to you? I know at OAR, that's the big message, right? Share the stories, not just for history, but for yourself. I mean, do you think it's helpful to you to get that out?
Yeah. I think it is helpful, and it's definitely gotten easier because this is, sort of the first year I've been openly talking about it a lot. It does help me process, and I think I too now know my limits, that yes, it's okay to think about these things a little bit more than I used to, but maybe don't go on, Instagram rabbit holes. So that's how I used to think about things, and that was very unhealthy for me, as I would just, look at any video I could find about just Afghanistan, period. So
yeah, it becomes, I can understand that. Okay, that was a later question that I was going to ask. So I want to go back to, what was the reason for pulling you off of FST duty and bringing you back to, the ECC to do, as you say, your job, which of course you need to do your job. But was that it? Just that you needed to do the job, and that was more important than FST duty?
So my job is I was the adjutant for CLB 24, but the adjutant for 1-8 was not there. So I was trying to help out where I could with, personnel, because that was the biggest part of my job, is making sure personnel are accounted for, and then when it came to plane rosters, making sure they're all correct, everyone's going where they're supposed to be. So when it came time to actually get out of Afghanistan, that's when I was pulled, is when we started to plan the redeployment back to Kuwait, because they needed someone to help out with all of that, which that is my job. I am supposed to do that. So I tried to argue with it. I do understand it, but it does, eat me up inside that I couldn't finish what I started with, like, my team. But we did get the rest of our unit out of there on time by the deadline, and I think that if it wasn't for helping out with all that, it would have been a lot. I don't know if we would have. I mean, I'm sure it would have happened, but it would have been way less organized. So I understand, like, and especially too as an officer, like, you're sort of one of one, and then especially as an adjutant, I was the only one who really could do my job, except for really probably my staff NCO, but he was doing something else, and they didn't want him, they wanted me back. So
yeah, and it is an important job, especially as you're getting ready, and as that's happening. You touched on the way you said it was highly impactful. It raised the hairs on my hand. Like, the only time that the JOC was chaos was on August 26th. And what was it like for you, from your point of view, on August 26th as the Abbey Gate bombing occurred?
Yep. So I was actually in, I guess, the berthing where we would sleep. I had just gotten back from getting some work done at the ECC, because they did have a computer there for me to use, the evacuation control center. So I had just gotten back from that and was just catching up, because all of the females, we did live in the same area. It was a co-ed, essentially it was a warehouse that we lived in, but we did live in the same area. So I was catching up with the girls that I was staying with, who had just got back from Abbey Gate. So I got done my work, and then I went to catch up with the girls that I was staying with, who, like I said, just got back from Abbey Gate, and they were telling me what was happening there, how absolutely chaotic it was. They were, telling me all their stories from the day, and I was just saying, I wish that I had been out there with you guys instead of, doing my job, which was being an adjutant. But that was actually their first time at Abbey Gate, because, like I said before, we typically, we were not supposed to man Abbey Gate. We were supposed to man North Gate and East Gate. And then I don't know exactly what happened, how I heard. I think someone got a text. I didn't actually hear the bomb, because Abbey Gate was so far away from our berthing. We lived right across from the terminal. And so I didn't actually hear it, but someone got a text and said what happened. So me and another female who was a staff NCO, we started to go over towards the JOC. And we wanted to see what was going on, and we wanted to see if we could get a ride out there. We had talked to a couple other people, and they were obviously trying to get medical personnel out there, so nobody would give us a ride. So we were walking to Abbey Gate, or not Abbey Gate, to the JOC to see what was going on, if we could get a ride. Immediately, one of the senior officers in my unit comes up to me. I don't even know what happened at this point. comes up to me and he says, Gabby, you need to go see the MU-ADJ so you can do mass casualty reports, because that was also a part of my job, was to do like casualty reports whenever something like that happened. And so I just kept asking, like, sir, what's going on? What happened? And he didn't tell me. It was my XO, who I really, really respect and had a great relationship with him. He came up less frantic and said, you know, this is what happened and this is what we need you to do. So I went and I checked with the MU-ADJ. Do you need me to do casualty reports? And then it was around this time that the sirens started going off, and I can still hear the sirens in my head to this day. And then what it's saying over the intercom is ground attack, repeating over and over. And there's actually videos that I saw of it on Instagram somewhere, and it's like just over and over the siren and just saying ground attack. And so I found the MU-ADJ, found out that someone from the Joint Task Force was going to be doing all the casualty reporting and everything like that. I still at this point did not know who, how many, nothing like that. I couldn't get an answer out of anyone until after that. I did go back to where my unit was in the JOC, which was way less, it was way more off the beaten path than the actual JOC floor. It was just kind of a back room. And then that's when it was sort of described to me. And there were, they did bring back the females that were physically uninjured at the time who had been out there. And so we met up with them, and my staff NCO, the female staff NCO that was with me, she ended up staying with them. And then I went back to the berthing by myself, which was like a couple blocks down. And, the sirens are still going off. I'm walking up to the berthing, and everyone's posting security outside. So I'm walking up, and there's all these guns pointing at me because people are pointing, posting for security. And I'm just like, I don't want anyone to get it misconstrued that it's someone else. And then it was getting dark out, so we started pulling MVGs and stuff of that nature. And because at that point I did know what had happened, so I went to the females in my berthing and told them. So that
sounds massively chaotic from that point of view too. And it was, because I've heard some descriptions of all of the movement that was going on, taking people to where they needed to go to get aid. I mean, were you seeing that going on as well in the background?
Honestly, I think I was just so dead set on like what it was I was doing next, which honestly we were not that far from the hospital, so there probably were a lot of vehicles moving around, but to be honest with you, I didn't notice. I was just set on the next thing that I have to do, and then there were other threats too. We didn't know what was going to be happening. We were hearing that, that maybe someone's going to try to use a vehicle to come in. And so it was a lot. Honestly, I probably should have been more observant that day.
Oh, no. I mean, you've got blinders, right? It's like, that's what you're describing, is like, I have to do like what's in front of me. I can't even imagine in that chaos trying. In fact, I don't think anyone has described it without saying just what you said. Like, there's so much going on that they fixate on what's in front of them, and that's that. And so I've heard many different, blinders on perspectives, and it's hard then to imagine and try to put them all together. I cannot even imagine what that day must have been like. And then from there, it seems like everything shifts, right? We are getting out of here. The gates closed after that, correct? There was no,
Yep.
they had to keep Abbey open for a while because of the British, I think, or something. I might be misremembering that.
So they ended up pulling the females, if I'm remembering correctly, they ended up pulling the females from the gates. If not immediately, it was the day or the second day after that. And then everyone was just posted at the evacuation control center, and people were being brought in by exception and brought straight there to get searched. And then, wait to get on a plane. Because after, I think, the Abbey Gate, after what happened there, I think they were just trying to, because at that point, HKIA was so crowded. There were people everywhere. Like, the amount of people, I've never seen that many people in my entire life all in one place. So at that point, they were just trying to get everyone who was inside the facility on a plane to leave. And then, eventually for us to get on a plane to leave.
It almost sounds like a miracle that was able to be accomplished in, 3 days. And without you doing your job, it probably would not, like you said. I mean, everybody had their role there in making that all happen. You didn't do any of the, like, ruining of the equipment we left behind or anything like that in your last days?
I was really mad. So there were some of us that, once the gates were closed and we had a little bit more free time, there were some of us that went out and started to, mess around with some of the equipment, until we were told not to, that is for us to leave in good condition. We were told that by RCO.
No way. That's the opposite of what, if you ask, the Pentagon now about the condition that we left things in. That's the opposite of the story that I recall hearing. And I'll have to look back at my correspondence with the Pentagon to see that, but I thought we were supposed to leave it all in terrible shape so the Taliban couldn't use it.
Well, we were told to stop destroying it. We were also told to clean everything up on the airfield. And there were still active threats, obviously, because, there's still military personnel, and then ISIS-K is still around. We actually, there was one time when I was at one of the very front of the gates, where someone came up who had been grabbed by the Afghan National Army when they were still there. So this was still in the early days. Grabbed, and he was actually part of Al-Qaeda. So they took care of him. And yeah, so there were still threats, and we're in a valley, which the airfield was in a valley, cleaning up, putting our lives at risk, cleaning up the airfield, making sure it's nice and clean for the next, whoever is coming next.
That's just despicable to me. So all of this to say, we're almost an hour in, but none of this is the reason that I brought you on. And I love it. I took more notes during talking to you than I think I've taken in any episode. But honestly, you were in a round table with OAR, a week, 2 weeks ago, talking about your experience after HKIA. And I was in the middle of trying to clean up after bedtime. And I was like, I wanted to be there, but the timing was so bad. But as soon as I heard what you were saying, I just was floored, and I had to stop what I was doing and listen. And so I wanted you to come on here and talk about the aftermath for you, because on top of all of the moral injury that we've already kind of talked about a bit, and the, reliving all those moments and going back into the Instagram rabbit holes, you faced a lot of ostracism after your unit departed from Afghanistan. So can you talk to me about why that started and what happened?
Yeah, so we left Afghanistan and went back to Kuwait. We were in Kuwait to be doing a decompression period where they brought in chaplains and mental health professionals, stuff of that nature. But at the same time, we were supposed to be going back to our platoons and our sections. So we have been training in the ECC shift groups or the female search team shift groups for it was months at this point. And then obviously going through a terrible experience like we did in Afghanistan, you're going to become really close with the people around you. So when it came time to go back to our regular sections and our regular platoons, it's hard to cut ties with the people that you've been hanging out with for so long and that you've went through the worst experience of your life with. And I think that people were thinking that maybe me and some of the other female staff NCOs had something to do with some of the females not wanting to really cut ties with the female search teams. Essentially what it was is the females were having trouble integrating back into their platoons and their sections. So I had been with the male staff NCOs and officers for the entire deployment, especially the ones that were on my ship. So all of a sudden, I'm feeling a shift, which I was also obviously going through my own personal stuff. And then on top of that, I was processing every single award from Afghanistan and reading through everything that happened there to all the people that I care about, which is everyone in my unit. So reliving it every single day while everyone else had a decompression period. I was working. I was working the entire time we were in Kuwait. So when it came time for me to hang out with friends, I was confused when I would wave at someone and they wouldn't wave back, or I would sit down at a table and they wouldn't talk to me, and shortly after they would get up. Or if I would go to the smoke pit and people would leave. I was confused. And then it started coming out that some of the male officers are saying that me and the other female are a bad influence on these girls. And so the people that I had spent the entire deployment with, who were some of my best friends, they wanted nothing to do with me because they thought that I was a bad influence. They thought that that I was preventing people from going back to their sections when I was in my room working the entire time on awards. And so it got to a point where we were actually at I forget if it was a class or what it was, that I get a message on my phone, which, by the way, is in a group chat with all of the staff NCOs and officers. And it says, Lieutenant Southern and Gunnery Sergeant so-and-so come to my room after the class is over. It was like a battalion-wide class that we were doing. And so me and my friend, she was my friend, but she was like my female staff NCO. We went over there and immediately walk in. There's an audience of essentially all his friends. It seemed like it was, I think, 3 of them, which were all, it was a staff NCO and a couple other male officers. And he starts ripping into us, cursing, screaming at us, saying that we're not effing special, that we need to let the girls go back to their sections, that the female search teams are not a thing anymore, that it doesn't matter what you guys did out there because you guys are supposed to be back in your sections. And at this point, I was just so confused, and I start asking questions. So the gunny that I was with, she, very respectful, immediately goes and stands at parade rest. But me, I'm like, sir, what are you talking about? I genuinely don't know what you're talking about. Can you please tell me what I'm doing wrong? And he's not explaining himself, but he's still ripping into me. And so after that, like, I was just like so lonely. Like, I didn't have any of my friends anymore. The only male that would talk to me is now my husband. So, and people were actually ripping into him too, telling him, why do you keep eating with her? You need to eat with us. Don't eat with her. And then he would show up to the smoke pit and people would leave. And he, like, it just, so people were taking out on him what they wanted to be taking out on me, I guess. So it was a really, really tough time. Obviously, I'm trying to process everything that happened in Afghanistan. I'm trying to go through all these awards, and, you know, awards are getting kicked back because my editing is not good enough. I didn't use the right wording, and you're telling me, who has, you know, so much respect for these people, and to me, the award looks like the best thing in the world, but you're kicking it back because of a minor thing when, you know, I just went through what I went through there. It was awful. And my CO the entire time is just on me about, we have to get these awards routed up by the end of the month. So I didn't have time to do all those things that those guys were accusing me of. I honestly didn't. But yeah, it was really hard. I don't know if I really explained the whole thing to my parents, because, like, I didn't want them to feel bad for me, because I was just, like, in my room the entire time. It was not good. But I'm actually on good terms with everyone now. I can't tell you when exactly it happened. It was long after we got back to Camp Lejeune, and nothing happened, you know, no conversation between anyone, except for the fact that when we were in Kuwait, I did have to go tell the XO the encounter of what happened in the room, because I felt like it was just completely inappropriate to call two females into a room in front of your friends and scream at us for something we didn't know what we were doing. And my XO handled the situation, and he didn't, you know, say that I did anything wrong, which leads me to believe that maybe I wasn't doing anything wrong, that these people were just wanting to blame someone and be mad at someone for something. And if that's what they need to do, then I can't fault them. I mean, it was a hard time for everyone. The same guy who screamed at us in his room is the same guy that gave me my impact award from deployment. So I have the most respect for all these guys. It was an awful time, but, you know, I was going through a rough time too. So if someone needs someone to blame, then it's okay.
I push back on that, though. I don't think it is okay. Like, I understand it too. I can completely understand what you're saying, but to then create these, it's almost like a high school drama, right? Like, well, Gabby's doing this, and like where did that come from? Who is saying that and why? Like, I still want to know. High school Beth is like, excuse me, who started this? Like, let's find them, because this is nonsense, you know? And I get it. I do. Like, everybody's processing the trauma, but you didn't deserve to have to process the one trauma and then to be ostracized by the people who were there with you and who, I mean, be mad, but don't be mad at you, right? I'm sorry that you went through that.
Thank you. Yeah. I know. I'm surprised that I didn't try to figure out more of why, because normally that's the type of person I am, but I think that at a certain point I just wanted it to be over with, and I just wanted to be on good terms with everyone.
Yeah.
Still to this day, I don't know why all that happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. Like I said, I heard you talking about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, we have to talk about this other thing that that's going on top of these other things. And, the awards too, because that's something that I've tried to track. I know that so many people got put in for like a car and didn't get it, and they only gave out a couple of them. And I know it's not your editing, right? But like,
So
there's this whole. Oh, please.
Yeah, I can offer some insight on that, because there was a lot of people, in my opinion, that I thought deserved cars. But at the battalion level, they were sort of, the leadership there was saying who is going to get cars and who is not going to get cars. So actually, two of the girls that were at the gate when the bombing happened, who were in my unit, they did not immediately get put up for cars. And I also think that contributed to a lot of like resentment that people had against me and my unit after Afghanistan, because they thought that I was the keeper of all awards. I was not. I am just doing what I'm told. If I'm told not to submit someone for a car, that the CO is not going to approve it, then why would I submit it if the CO is telling me not to? That's disobeying a direct order, and I'm a Marine. So essentially, it just came down to who we were told to put in for combat action ribbons. And then eventually, which luckily for those two females, enough stuff came out after the fact that I was told to submit them for cars, and then I did. But it was hard for me, because I want to submit everyone for every single award. And people were coming to me asking, why isn't this person getting this award? Why isn't this person getting a car? Why isn't this person getting a Navy comm and they got a NAM instead? I just do all the admin stuff. I am not the one who approves or denies an award, and yes, I can put someone in for an award, but I can't put someone in for an award if I'm being told not to, because that's disobeying a direct order. So,
yeah. And I think the thing that made me crazy when I first heard about it is that everybody, it should have been everybody, right? That's a combat zone, but nobody wants to admit it. And I actually asked the Pentagon and I asked CENTCOM in a media request, hey, was it designated a combat zone? Because if you're going to give some people cars and you're not going to give other people cars, like what's the rationale there? If, I always have wanted to know more about that, and I never got responses. And usually you get a response, even if it's one that's very blasé and very, like not an answer to your question, but they're at least giving you yeah, we got it, and we can't comment on that at this point in time, right? No response. Right. I was already, because I had heard from, Mike Markland and other people about that inequity going on, and I wanted to find an answer. And that really is going to bother me for a long time, that there's no answer, because you guys all experienced something heinous, that if you don't want to call it combat, why is that? And if you do, sometimes, it's only combat if you were at Abbey Gate during these hours. Like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. That is essentially what it came down to. Is I had to bring those two females into my office and ask them, how many football fields away do you think you were from the explosion? Mm-hmm. That's how they were calculating it. It's in terms of, how close were you when something happened? I had someone, one of my friends, that was at Northgate one night when someone got shot, and there was fire back and forth, and she didn't fire her weapon, but she was posting security. She didn't get a combat action ribbon. So there was very unclear guidance as to who rated a combat action ribbon and who didn't.
Yeah, and I do feel like I was telling you this before we started, that like, it's hard to look at these anniversaries now because I think some people are still using them for politics, right? And I feel like it was a political decision to not say that it was a combat zone at HKIA because people wanted to cover their asses. Mm-hmm. And I'm a civilian, so, I mean, take everything I say with, like, 17,000 grains of salt, right? Like, I don't know jack about what I'm talking about in all reality, but that's how it felt to me.
You know a lot more than most people.
But I know a couple little things.
Because all the awards from Afghanistan all have the C device on them, which the C device means combat. Mm-hmm. So how are you saying it's not a combat zone, but yet all these impact awards have a combat C on them?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So that is interesting. And like, then don't, answer the question, right? Pentagon, answer the question. Tell the people. And those of us who care are not, I think the people who really care about this, they don't care about it because they want to point fingers and say, it's your problem, and don't elect this person again, and don't elect that person again. They care because they were there, because people they cared about were there, and bear the pain of it because people lost people, or because, they fought in that, some part of that country over the course of our 20 years there, or they loved someone who did, or they volunteered there. I mean, the people who really care about this aren't doing it for politics. So exactly. Tell them the truth.
Right. And that's why I started to kind of speak up, just because I think that there's so many people that don't have a voice, and people think that, whoever was there wants an award for clout, or they want a to build their stack on their ribbon rack. That is, for the most part, there are people like that, but that is absolutely not the case. Something absolutely life-changing happened to all of us who were there. I think about what happened there every single day, and I will probably think about it every single day until the day that I die. It is the most significant thing that's ever happened in my life, and it's impacted me, and it's impacted a lot of people. So what I think people want is just a little bit of recognition. They want someone in a position of power to, recognize what they did, and that they did the best that they could, and we did a damn good job when we were there. And there has, there's really not been a lot of people that have given us the recognition that I think that we deserve, and that I think a lot of the young Marines deserve, especially, or not even Marines, service members, that a lot of the service members deserve. And I think that that's why a lot of the service members are in such a dangerous situation and are struggling so much, because they went and did this thing, but nobody's talking about it and nobody cares about it.
I feel the same way, and it's vitally important that we do something that makes an impact. That is, we do recognize you, and we see you, and you never should have had to do that.
Right.
And I would love to see that happen. And in the interim, I'm just glad that there are groups like OAR, and that, people are out there telling their story, even if it is hard. I mean, I don't think I've talked to a single HKIA veteran who didn't say that August is just a terrible month.
Yeah.
And that it's re-traumatizing, and I want so much better for you guys, for what you had to do. And I think anybody knew it was going to be terrible, but listening to you, like I said, I took more notes than I've taken in any single episode, because the things you're telling me, I'm so amazed. I'm so proud that you guys recognize so many months out that we need to start training for this. We need to prepare for what's going to happen. Even if they tell us it's going to be one way, we need to prepare for the other way too, as much as we can, you know. That is, and I will say it until the day I'm in the ground, like, it's the people who were on the ground, the people who were on the phones back home trying to get people out, like, those people made the difference. And so I'm just really grateful to you for making that difference and working above and beyond what was asked of you. I can't even think about the extra pain that might have been caused if you hadn't done that. So I appreciate it. And I just want to give you the floor if there's anything else you want to say before we close out here that I didn't ask about.
So I just wanted to thank you for having me, because all any OAR veteran really wants is to be seen and heard. And I haven't really talked about it much. I've talked about it a little. Obviously, my husband was there with us, and I'm very grateful that I have someone to relate to on that level. So we talk about it, but honestly, we only talk about it a couple times a year, and this is one of my first times speaking publicly on it, and I'm not doing it to, you know, like cause anyone to, you know, question my integrity, and I don't want to feel like I'm putting people, I guess, on blast. I'm just doing this to sort of raise awareness and to tell my story, and so hopefully other people will tell their stories so that, you know, we can keep remembering what happened out there. So thank you for having me.
No, thank you. The honor is truly mine. This was amazing. And anybody else who hears this and wants to tell their story, I'm always happy to listen, and it means the world to me to hear them. So I will close out by just reminding everybody that we're always looking to tell Afghan stories too. We usually close out episodes with a story from someone who experienced, 20 years of war, the withdrawal, or refugee resettlement, or waiting on refugee resettlement from an Afghan listener. So if you want to share those stories, you can send them, and we can keep you anonymous because it's me, and I'm happy to do that, and there's no other person. It's just me. I don't know why I keep saying we when I give this part of the spiel. But the show address is the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Gabby, thank you again. I know these were really hard topics, and you are just so clear on all these things. It was really a pleasure to talk today.
Thank you.
All of our listeners, thanks for sharing your time, for supporting the people of Afghanistan, for supporting veterans and service members and all the people who really left a lot of themselves and put a lot of themselves in harm's way for other people. If you've enjoyed the episode, typical spiel, make sure you're following the YouTube page and that you've got notifications enabled so that you can hear about all our future episodes. Tasha Kaur, and hope to see you again soon.